Today we're speaking with the artist DeeKay. DeeKay began as a graphic and motion designer, creating short animated works that spread widely online for their clarity, humor, and emotional resonance. Over time, those animations evolved into something much larger. His work now centers around characters, environments, and what we can think of as world building, creating spaces where people, stories, and emotions can exist across both digital and physical forms. Through the recent exhibitions, including a large-scale solo presentation in Korea and a recent presentation at Art Basel Hong Kong, and his project Deeple, The People, his work has expanded into sculpture, installation, and participatory environments. So today we're going to talk about how that world is built, where it comes from, and where it's going. DeeKay, great to be with you here in Seoul.
I'm glad to be here.
So before we get into all of your artwork and just your practice, I wanted to go a little bit earlier and sort of talk to you about when you were younger. Sort of what drew you to these, creations that you create? Was it games, animations, or maybe something else? So sort of as a kid, what types of things were you interested in and involved with?
Ever since I was little, I was always drawn to drawings. And I think that was like the only thing that I got compliments on from friends and teacher. And other thing else, like I wasn't really good at it, I feel like. And naturally, drawing was it just became a thing for me. And of course, playing like retro games such as like Super Mario's, it was such a huge inspiration for me. And that got into me like really I got really into it. And ever since then, it was always been a dream for me to do like doing a game design or I don't know, like illustration. And I was always a big fan of like cartoons and animations. And yeah, I was always that drawing kid in class who doesn't really focus on class and just always doodles.
Do you have a lot of those sketchbooks still?
Some of them I do. I'm pretty sure that I have some somewhere in garage back in my parents' house, but I haven't really looked into it.
I'd love to see if like any of your characters that you've sort of developed now, manifested back then as well. That's sort of interesting to think about.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that at the time when I, started doodling, all those things have been pure and like just like pure imagination, and it was just me, right? But then as I grew older, I started to develop like more commercials design, something more that would fit in the commercial and like corporate world. And as I started to do my own personal works, it drew back to where I started.
Wow.
So like my design became more like finesse and clean, and that would fit more on the corporate world.
So you originally you were drawing like sort of characters, and then you were doing some sort of advertisements too as a kid, or were you recreating commercials or?
I guess not necessarily. The characters I drew, I haven't really got a chance to do much of that when I worked at like companies. But I guess it was just I put that aside, I guess, while I was working professionally, and kind of forgot about it. I was more focused on like graphic design, like just clean UI UX and all those stuff. And when I started doing my personal works, doodles that I used to draw as a kid, kind of brought back, and then I got into it, and it just developed more ever since.
And so you, as a kid, you were drawing, and then you went off to school. After you graduated from high school, you went off to school. Could you tell us a little bit about that and where you were at and what you were up to?
Yeah, so after high school, I went to college in New York, School of Visual Arts to be exact. That's where I got introduced to animation and graphic design, like motion graphics, computer art. I started to learn Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, and some like 3D programs like Maya or Cinema 4D. I gained those skills using those tools, but I wasn't able to continue my education in SVA just because I didn't have enough tuition. So after second year, I kind of dropped out.
I see. So during those 2 years, you were experimenting and working with these amazing tools like Cinema 4D, Photoshop, etc. Did you then use those skills in the real world and working?
Yeah. At the first company that I got hired to work at was a small post-production company. At there, working as an intern, I got to do like many different things, like all Photoshop, Illustrator, After Effects, all 3D stuff. And then that's where I feel like, I really up my levels and like improve my skills overall.
And I think people are always interested in landing that first gig. How did that come across? Was it a Craigslist ad? What was that process? Or did you know someone from the school?
No, it was more of like, after I dropped out, I wanted to work right away because I needed the money.
Yeah.
So, I just Googled all the production company that I can find in New York City. It was like over 100, and then I just sent a resume with like a very amateurish portfolio that I made at the time. Of course, I didn't get that much reply, but it was that one studio that, reached out back to me, and they hired me an intern job. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And that's how it began.
And what types of projects were you doing at that studio?
It was a lot of like, we call it like end tags. Like whenever there's like a commercial and at the end there's like an end tag where, logo animation of a certain company with like like a sentence or something. And, it was just like a simple end tag. And sometimes it would be like simple music videos, editing, color corrections, and some visual effects here and there. And then there are times where I would do just like full 2D animations too, like frame by frame drawing, and also like simple motion graphics, and all those kind of stuff.
Amazing. Yeah, you especially you look at things now with intros and outros. When I was at Day, the ad agency, we were working on Nissan, and we'd have Shift, and that was the end tag that they had. So I'm very familiar with this. Also, music was part of that experience. With those end tags, were you using music, not only the graphics as well, yeah?
Yeah, 100%.
Were you composing those things, or those were just sampled, or how did that sort of work?
The music?
Yeah, the music.
I guess at the studio, we didn't compose the music ourselves.
I see.
I guess maybe the client hired like some other studio for that one. Yeah.
Definitely. Because thinking about your work now, how music sort of drives the narrative and stuff. So it's just interesting to think about your early days with these end tags and that intro, outro, and how that sort of comes to be. So you have this internship, you're making some money. Are you doing anything on the side too with your own individual practice, or what's going on in New York right now?
So in the beginning, of course, I didn't have my own thing. It was just me trying to survive in the city. I made like $50 a day working as an intern. I was happy with that too, because before that, I remember working at like a Quiznos, the sandwich place, and I used to work as like a sandwich maker. I remember earning like $8 per hour. At that time, that was like the baseline, right? But then earning like $50 a day was like a huge amount for me. And it wasn't even that tiring. You just have to sit in front of the computer and just do some like Photoshop work or like animation. And I get paid for like $50. I was super happy with it. And I still remember that vividly.
So just real quick before we move on to Quiznos, do you have a favorite sub, or what was your or you don't like any of the subs now?
I still do. I would still prefer Quiznos over Subway, but you don't see Quiznos as much.
But that's also an interesting thing too, because you were working with people. You were seeing all different types of people, I'm sure, in the shop as well. And that had to be really interesting, especially in New York, to interface. As we think about Deeple and that project, you did get to see like a cross section of life there.
That's for sure. I think I was always exposed to like very different cultures. I was in a very international environment. Because of that, I think I got to meet like many different type of people, like in terms of just the looks, the personality. So, it was pretty natural for me to get along with all different kinds of people.
Well, and also, I'm sure you had repeat customers as well, so you would also probably get to experience their different moods as well, which is sort of interesting to think about too.
Yeah,
personalities.
I agree. I definitely agree.
So so you're doing this internship. Did you move to another agency, or did you do any freelance, or what sort of came after this internship?
So after intern, I got hired as a full time. So I was really happy to get my first job ever. But a year after that, I got laid off. The studio wasn't doing too well, and they had to lay off like half of the people, and I was one of them. And was kind of forced to become a freelancer. But by that time, I already gained a pretty decent portfolio, I would say. So I was able to get like another job pretty easily, And that's how my freelance life began, just working to like studios, to agencies to studios, jumping around everywhere in New York City.
Amazing. And how about your own practice? Were you starting to doodle more, or was there anything going on?
So after like 3-4 years, I was doing okay financially, right? So that's when I started to think about like, oh, I want to do my own thing now. Because at the time when I do client works, I mean, I enjoyed doing client works, but at the same time, it wasn't like purely mine. There was always the directions and certain designs that they wanted, and I had to make sure that, you know, clients are okay with it. So, you know, in order for me to fulfill this void that I had creatively, I started doing my own thing on the side. You know, but before that, I tried to do that. I tried to fill that void through client works, and it just didn't work out because you know how it is. Like, you know, when you're working with clients, you never get to have your full control. You know, and at one point, I just accepted the fact that, you know, work is work, and you know, I'll do whatever the work that pays a bill and accept that as a work, and then on the side, I will do my own thing. And around like 2014, I believe, that's when I started my Instagram account, and my goal was to just, you know, upload my practice and just improve my skills as much as I can. But didn't know that, you know, I was going to make a whole brand out of it and like, you know, have some fans. I never even thought of that. But if you go to my Instagram page and go all the way down, you can see the progress, like how much have improved.
Wow, it's like a portfolio almost.
Exactly.
Your
Like
progress.
Exactly. It's not like a lot of people use Instagram as like a portfolio page where, you know, they just highlight the best work ever, right? But for me, it's more of like a, I don't know, like album, or what do you call it? Like the history album.
Yeah, like a photo album.
Yeah, photo
like,
album,
yeah, of your
exactly.
past, yeah.
So, I mean, I'm doing okay now. Like, I guess I'm pretty okay with my practice, but if you go way back, it's not that great. It's pretty horrible. But yeah, I still have it up there.
But that's interesting. Being a creator that creates digitally, you have this almost feedback loop that happens as well. So I'm sure that it's so interesting that you didn't necessarily have a strategy. You just put yourself out there, you put your work out there, and you sort of let it become, you know, be received. But yeah, that's really fascinating. And a lot of other creatives I've talked to that create digitally talk a lot about this, that feedback loop. But it's also interesting to think about you as a creator being very vulnerable, because you're going to get comments. Some things aren't always going to hit. But I think it's really powerful that you've left those up there and that you can see this actual progression. So you're working and you're like, oh, wow, I'm starting to get some traction. When did you get that first? When was that tipping point for you with your Instagram account?
I think, you know, it was always a slow growth, and which was okay with. And I didn't really care about, you know, growing my account. Like I said, it was just more about, you know, just making steps of like how much I progress. But at one point when I created this piece called Client versus Designer, it's just like a very simple animation GIF, animation about, you know, how designers are kind of like annoyed by clients' feedbacks, like, and the relationship, you know, a lot of those client and designer chemistry that, you know, all those designers have. I just made it into a like couple 5 or 6 animations. It's very relatable, kind of funny, very meme-like. That kind of went like super viral, and they gave me like 100K followers out of nowhere. Yeah, and you know, and that's when I realized, man, maybe I'm going somewhere with this. But you know, at the time though, like Instagram wasn't a thing where, you know, I'm gonna do this full time or like make money out of it. It was just more of like side thing, you know. I had like a pretty stable job, you know, and I always thought that, you know, that was going to be my forever thing, working as a animator or motion designer. And then the Instagram was always like a side thing. And it was like just a hobby.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So I love that you basically took care of your basic needs. So any creator, any artist, anyone that's, you know, creative, it's so important to have those basic needs taken care of, whether it's rent, food, you know, these basic things. And it's interesting that you took the approach to say, okay, I'm going to make sure I have my basic needs taken care of, and that'll allow for my creativity and my flow to sort of happen. So I think that's a thing that I'm hearing a lot as well, that sometimes we do need to, especially do the work, set up that baseline. We can't all be this starving artist. It's just not applicable in, today's world. But it's interesting that the digital creation, these digital works that you as a digital creator are able to have that baseline sort of work job and then be able to also create and have a practice as well. I think what's interesting too is thinking about, so you have this Instagram account that's doing really well. What are you doing then for that baseline job? If you had a shift in another agency, or are you doing more freelance work? I think getting to the point of when you're working for bigger brands and stuff like this.
Yeah. So, when I was starting to accept the fact that, work is work, that's when I kind of, wasn't really picky with studios. Because, before that, I was very picky with studios because I wanted to do like cool works. But ever since I, accepted the fact that, work is work, then I expanded my expertise and just work at any agencies, studios, or companies that, that pays me well. The monetary part was the priority for when it comes to work. And then, that's how I got into like IT industry as well, working for Google and Apple.
Okay, so you weren't doing graphics for them. You were doing IT work, or
no. I mean like, Google and Apple is IT industry, right? So,
yeah, I got you. That vertical.
Within Google and Apple, they have like a, graphics team, like motion graphics or production team. And I got to join their team and then, work as a motion designer.
It's interesting, advertising, because you were working maybe on some short video, narrative videos and stuff, animated videos. It's interesting to think about advertising because you have to really compact short stories and messages in very a short amount of time. So it's interesting to think about a lot of your work it's not necessarily short, it's so impactful. It's so filled to the brim with messages and thoughts and narrative. Maybe could you talk about that experience at Apple and maybe your, the work that you were doing there as well?
Yeah, huge companies like Google and Apple, the team is always big. So there are multiple motion designers, there are multiple graphic designers, producers, and all this CG team. So I don't really get like a huge responsibility where I take care of everything and I have to come up with like the whole story. So, and there's like a director, right? And director just tells me to animate a certain part and I just do that. But of course, as a motion designer, I wasn't always animating certain cuts. I was also doing like explorer animations on UI UX. So how the website works when you click certain button, and when you look at your phone and you press a button, and how the user experience works, and all those kind of just moving parts. I was part of it, and of course, like there were a bunch of like other motion designers who were also doing stuff like that. So I wasn't the only one.
Yeah, so you're part of a team. Again, getting back to the Quiznos shop, thinking about you're working in a large corporation and you're working with a lot of different types of people because you're now in Northern California. You're in Palo Alto?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I mean, that's, again, another cross-section of humanity, too, which is really, really cool. I guess thinking about now, okay, you got your basic needs taken care of. You're working for these big brands. You're part of a team. But when did we shift to almost now you're creating your own work? You are the director. You are the copywriter. You are the storyteller. You are everything. When did we, I guess, was it the success of the Instagram that propelled you to like take your work from just being a basic motion graphic to something that has a little bit more weight, almost like something we would consider art?
It's funny how you say it like that because it sounds very heavy, like director, storytelling, from beginning to the end. But I guess I was kind of doing that without really acknowledging it.
Sure.
But I guess that started when I started my own practice, which is around like 2014, like beginning of my Instagram post. Of course, at the time, it was just like a very small, just simple animations here and there. But as I started to grow my Instagram, I gave like more storytelling and just a little more context to what I create. But I remember even now, the most focus that I do when it comes to creating is always make a storytelling that is relatable to people. And that's always my number one thing.
And I think you're quite successful at it. So maybe the birth of these characters, because one of the things to be relatable to people is to almost allow them to see themselves in your work. Could you share with us a little bit about this sort of birth of these characters? There's a character, I would say maybe it's a self-portrait of you, the glasses, the hair.
Yeah.
It's very much DeeKay. Maybe walk us through like the point in which that character arrived, and then so many of the others sort of came into being.
So when I was growing Instagram, there's a profile picture, right? So I felt that, I need to create a logo or something. And I just created a, this cartoon version of myself. And ever since then, I stuck to that kind of character and then, developed it and then included on every storytelling that I would do. That kind of just simple drawing has always been like a character that I've been drawing ever since I was a kid. Yeah. And, I kind of brought it back when I started starting my own practice. Yeah, because it's so like he's so cute, but he's like he's going through the world, and we all sort of like tapping into that. Deeple, so maybe talk to me about the process of, so you have the Instagram practice, you're still working, you're building these characters, you're building these worlds. Maybe take me through, sort of the next sort of point of success or that thing that took you to the next level. I guess, as I was creating work for Instagram, the more followers that I get, the more engagements I get, the more effort I would put onto my next piece and after. And, I just started including like other characters here and there. I guess my overall design became more finessed. And I think my overall just practice, it's still evolving, I would say. It never stops in just like one design. I don't know, like there wasn't like a certain point where it just evolved like heavily. Sure. Just like it was always been like a steady, like slow growth. So I think we had this amazing moment with that client versus designer, and then maybe the next big moment for you with the recognition of your own artwork was maybe during the NFTs and the distribution of digital art in a new way. After the designer and client series, there were a couple other stuff that kind of became viral, and then I was able to grow pretty good. What were some of those? Do you recall? It's it's kind of silly to look back. I'm kind of embarrassed to even talk about it. There was a piece called Batman versus Superman, and that one, and also there's like a lot of smaller animations that don't even have a title, actually. Just like a very loop animations. One like a person riding a skateboard. So I reversed that. So it was like a skateboard was riding a person. So funny. Just like small like meme like animations, and just silly ones that kind of became viral here and there. So what years are these? We're getting into before 2020. Yeah, so it was around like 2007, 2020. In between that, I done like a lot of small GIF animations. Actually, the piece that became very viral, I just remember, it was animator creating animation. It's my first full film, like 3 minutes long animation, but the aspect ratio is square. It was purposely, I made it in that aspect ratio so that people can see it on their phone, not on the computer. Yeah. And the story is about animator is created this character and an animation, and within the computer, the background, you see like all this user interface, like OS. It opens like a certain programs and creates it opens up the Illustrator and creates a character, and then brings it to After Effects and start doing animation, and then post it on Instagram. So it shows the whole process of what the artist goes through from start to finish, from like creating a piece and then posting it to the Instagram. And the animator, which is myself, is kind of like always like refreshing to see like how many engagements I get. And to tell you the full story, I didn't receive like that many likes, and the character becomes sad. But then the post itself becomes alive, and then clicks the like for him, and then starts hugging the creator. So the message is that even if no one really pay attention to your work, the work that you created will always be there to love you back. So that's the message that I created. And then that piece became like pretty viral. It's one of my favorite pieces. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. So if you're not getting the likes you want, you at least have the creation that you created that will hug you back and love you. So
Yep, that's
really
the message.
nice.
Yeah.
I love that.
Thank you.
So we're getting these viral pieces on Instagram. And then all of a sudden, we go into the pandemic. You're still working
Yes.
as well? What's going on at that time?
So at that time, I was working at Apple. And, you know, I heard about this NFTs and like Web3, and I didn't understand. And there were a couple of friends who, you know, told me about it and encouraged me to do it, but I didn't understand the concept. I kind of hold it back. Like the first time I heard was like around early 2020, actually. And I was not paying attention. But when I started to pay attention was when Deeple was doing a drop. Because, you know, I've been following people ever since I was a student, like back in 2009. For those who, you know, who was in that industry, everyone knows about Deeple. You know, everyone knows about how crazy he is, you know, posting every day. I had like huge respect for him. And when I found out that, you know, he's doing NFTs seriously, that's when I realized that, oh, maybe I should really, you know, try it out and, you know, find out what this is about. And around like 2021 January, that's when I first minted my first piece on Foundation. And I uploaded it and minted it and, you know, just left it there. And then the next day I found out that, you know, there was a buyer. I was like, there's people out there who really wants to buy this digital NFT. Ever since then, I got really hooked into it and studied about the blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum, you know, just whole Web3 thing. You know, I wasn't even into stocks at the time. So I didn't know about like investing or anything at all. So it was pretty a wild ride.
Yeah, it opened your eyes. What was that piece that you minted on Foundation?
Piece is called the skateboard Rise You.
Oh, so that's the one you talked about earlier.
So it was just a random GIF animation that I made in the past. I just minted it. And turns out that there's people out there who wants to buy it.
That's amazing. So just as we go along your journey now and we talk about you building these worlds, I just love it. Just you have a job. You're working a 9 to 5 where it's probably more than a 9 to 5, but you're working a job, you're paying for your basic needs. You're using Instagram as a way to sort of test the waters of your artwork, looking at things. And then all of a sudden you start getting these viral posts. Some are mimetic, some are just relatable to people. Again, I love this, the animator creating animation, I think. That was what it's called? I think this is such a beautiful message. And then all of a sudden you just sort of stumble into a new way of distribution, a new way to sell artwork that you've been testing the waters for. So you get this first piece sold. It's a good amount and it affords you more time to work on your own artwork. Did you mint and did you sell other pieces in between before you maybe and did you transition out of working the corporate job?
Yeah, so after that piece, I minted like several other animations that I made in the past and some are new ones as well. And I was able to, you know, just sell out everything that I minted. And it wasn't like a huge money. I mean, of course, like all those passion work that I did and I was able to make money out of that. I was like a huge mind-blowing thing anyway.
Amazing.
But it wasn't like a life-changing money at the time. So I just kept minting several works while working at Apple. You know, after a year later, I got to a point where, you know, I surpassed how much money I was making with NFTs more than the Apple job.
So your art, vis-a-vis the distribution through NFTs, the blockchain, is now allowing you to make more money than your corporate job.
Exactly. But still, I was unsure about this whole future. I mean, I believe in the technology, but as an artist, like I wasn't sure if this is going to be like 100% sustainable.
Sure.
So even though I was making pretty decent amount of money, I wanted to be sure, like I wanted to, you know, of course I wanted to transition over, but I was still hesitating. I wanted to be sure that, you know, I have enough money for me to like last at least like a year. So even though I was making a little more than, you know, Apple money, I, you know, saved enough money for me to last like 1 year. And when I reached that point, that's when I decided to leave Apple and become a full independent artist.
Amazing. And how was that? Tell me, was that daunting? Was that scary? Did that feel invigorating? What were you going through at that point when you decided? I mean, that's a big step, but
It is. It's a huge step forward, and also very scary because I always get this paycheck, every 2 weeks, and that was like super normal and just like a thing for me, But after I, quit job at Apple, like I didn't get that paycheck anymore, and that feeling felt kind of scary, but also exciting because I get to spend my full time on this passion work that I love to do. So, I told myself that even if I'm making less money, I'll still be happy because I'm able to do what I love. And if something goes wrong and if, it doesn't work out, I always had the confidence to go back to the industry that I originally came from. I could always find a job if it doesn't work out.
That's good. And I think that's important too to think about as one is stepping out and becoming a full-time artist or creator, especially in a changing world. We don't know, but we are seeing with AI and stuff, a lot of these jobs are being taken away from humans, or maybe not taken away, but are shifting. And I think the creator economy is like really, really, really vibrant and interesting.
Yeah.
But it is good to have these baselines. So 2021, you're minting, you're selling. 2022, 2023. I think at one point you have an opportunity to do a solo presentation here in Korea. Was there anything in between that, or I mean, you had some great sales, but maybe talk about that.
Yeah. So I guess huge turning point was when I minted this piece called Destiny, and I minted on super rare. And at the time, my all-time high was like around like 30 ETH. Ethereum, and that's still like really high at the time. But I was hoping, since this is the piece that I poured my heart into, and it's like the masterpiece that I made, I was hoping like it could beat like my previous all-time high. So auction started, and there was two bidders. One was Cosimo de Medici, and another bidder was Zero Salt. So they were just going at it like crazy. It already surpassed my all-time high, and I thought it was gonna end around like just a little higher than my previous all-time high, but just kept going, kept going, and then it ended around 225. And I still remember like my mind was just overblown. Like I was shaking a little bit, and I was also like I was just so stunned about this crazy amount of money. And I guess that was like a huge turning point for me. And I realized that maybe I can do this full time.
Wow, that's so amazing. So you had this big sale, and then you're getting notoriety from all over the world. Are you going to New York? Are you traveling? Are you meeting people or from the Web3 space?
Yeah, so I remember going to NFT NYC 2021, but I remember that I didn't enjoy as much. And the reason is because it just felt like everything was like very party vibe, and it wasn't as like what I imagined, as an artist, like, I'm very focused on art, right? But all those events that I went to, it was more focused on the PFP. So they were just like, of course, it's part of NFT, but it was very just party, and people like, they were all very happy because, everyone was up with the numbers, and not so much talk about like art in general, like 101 art.
So we had, for PFP, we had these profile pictures. These were the Bored Apes, they were CryptoPunks. There was a variety of projects that were happening, and they were having different parties for these different projects. But yeah, there was a shift then. It was more onto the crypto markets and the sort of these collectible, like individual profile pictures, PFPs. And yeah, we started with the art being the sort of driver of this new way of distribution with the NFTs. And now all of a sudden we have these trading collectibles, almost like stock market type of mentality.
Yes.
So you felt, maybe you didn't feel really connected to that.
Yeah, I didn't really connect to that kind of community, I feel. Because yeah, it wasn't that natural for me.
Yeah. Did that inspire any other work then when you came back and you sort of came back from that experience? Was there any work that you created, or what were you creating at that time? Do you remember any pieces in particular?
I guess, those kind of events necessarily impact me in any way. It was just more of like, "Oh, I'm not going to go to the next one."
I see.
And, I just got back to, what I love to do, just creating art. But of course, I did start like a small collection because, all my one-on-ones were going at pretty high number. And I figured that, not everyone's going to be able to collect the big pieces. So I wanted to create like a small pieces, I can also start my own community. So the collection is called like Let's Walk. And also, of course, a few years later, then I started a Deeple. And those were the just small collections that, people can join with for a lot affordable money. Yeah.
So this is an interesting model. In the past, traditional art world with galleries and stuff, an artist would show and then the gallery would sort of have the collectors, it would be their sort of community. And sometimes those collectors would buy from each of the artists that the gallery represents. So the gallery very much became the intermediary and sort of created the community around. Now all of a sudden that you're direct to the collector, you're creating your own community. But you can't rely just on, everyone to buy a one-on-one at this price. So a great way to think about it is you create an edition or a smaller piece that allows for people to access it and become part of the community. We could almost think of it as like an edition, a poster, merch, etc. So this is a very interesting thing. So you come from the New York experience, you sort of think about other ways to build community, which is very important at the time. But what's interesting too is so this is 2022 or so. 2023, then you have this amazing exhibition here in Seoul. Could you tell us about that? Because you have a lot of your elements in this show, but you're also able to really sort of harness this fine art practice. Could you tell us a little bit about that show and how that came up?
Yeah, so I was able to have my first solo show in Korea. Basically, it was just, a huge space I was able to do a show on. And I just put like all of my best works, and then into one place. And of course, there was a very huge, horizontally really long display. And I created this piece called I Love Korea for that specific display. And it's super long. It's kind of like...
How long is it?
I can't really...
But it's over like 5 minutes or so? Or is it...
The animation itself. The animation itself is, I would say, just like a minute. But I'm talking about like, it's long in terms of like the size.
Which this is an interesting thing, because when we talked earlier about the animator creating animation, or maybe designer and client, the format was this square.
Right.
So it becomes a very intimate sort of experience. I think that's one thing creators that are creating digitally forget about sometimes is thinking about how it's going to be received. And we'll get into that a little bit later, because I know you've had some experience with that recently at Art Bot in Hong Kong. Maybe, so this is a large format. This is like, is it horizontal landscape?
A horizontal landscape, super long. Imagine as like, the Super Mario game, like, if you were to map out the whole map.
Wow.
So it's that kind of long,
So very wide. So you're not just seeing a TV screen segment, but you're seeing the whole world almost. And this is on a large screen.
Yes, large LED screen. And that was like the main display at my solo show. But I thought of all the ways. Like, I also wanted to make sure that, it looks good on real life, but also it looks good on the socials. So the way I did it for the social version is that I created a camera following the character.
I see.
So the character goes through different environments of Korea, like here and there, jumping around and like eats like street food and collects some, just very much like a game, like a Super Mario almost. And the camera just follows the character like on a left to right. So for the social version, you see it looks like just a video gameplay, but on real life, you see the whole map with like several characters having their own version of like animation from left to right.
Wow. And then in this exhibition too, you have other screens, and you have, I believe there was a column too that's in the space. Maybe you can talk about some of the other variables in the space.
Other than the large display, there was also like a column, full LED display that just wraps around. and I created a specific animation for that as well. So there were a lot of interesting ways to showcase my work, because they had like all these cool LED displays that I was able to, it was like a playground for me. So they gave me all these specs and the resolutions and aspect ratio and all that, and
Fun.
I created like just it was animations according to those specs, and it was really fun.
And in this too, there were elements of 3D works too. There were sculptures.
Yeah, so I was able to work with this designer, toy designer. His name is, he goes by Cool Rain, and he liked my work, I liked his work, and we were able to collaborate together. So I gave him my 2D character design, and then he was able to make it into 3D and then sculpt it. Yeah.
Amazing, this collaboration. And you had, what sizes do you have for these?
I would say like 5 feet, 4 feet tall, 5 feet tall, around this.
And how was the reception of, how long was it up for, and how did people receive it, including maybe your own family and friends?
It was up for like 3 months,
Okay.
but then and then it reopened again for like several months, a few months after, and they had it on for pretty while. And then I was able to invite like all my relatives that live in Korea and my friends, and some other Web3 artists. They visited Korea because there was like a lot of NFT events at the time, and Deeple was here, and like other cool artist friends. They were kind enough to stop by, and it was really, really meaningful.
How was that having, because I've met Mike Deeple, and he and his brother Scott are just terrific.
Yes.
How was that, because you talked earlier about looking at his work as sort of inspiration, or seeing it as a way of how one can create digitally and have a practice. How was that for you to experience him seeing your work in the real?
It was amazing, I guess. It's just that, an artist like him, who is arguably like the top digital artist out there, took a time to really look at my work and like ask questions about like how I made certain things, and to ask about like the meanings of certain works. And it felt like, he's not just here because like other reasons, just he was there because he was really interested. And knowing that, it felt like really meaningful, and it meant a lot to me.
And that's sort of unique to a lot of these digital creators, is that you guys are all working sometimes solo on your computers, but you're connected vis-a-vis the social media or other ways. And so there's a real connectivity that goes beyond like geography. Because a lot of time artists that are painters, sculptors, they're sort of limited to their actual geography. And it becomes a really big world. So it's really nice to see so many artists support and show up for other artists. I really enjoy that. So we have this amazing success of this exhibition. I think these sculptures are amazing. I love that you're able to take these characters and make them into something real. How was it then? So we have this exhibition. That's such an amazing experience, such an amazing success. You then continue to make works then after that?
Well, since my expertise is not toy designing or like sculpture.
Oh, I meant just even digital stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So you made some more one-on-ones. One that I think I recall is the one of the tree. Could you take us through maybe that and when that happened? And it happened after the
Yes. So I started to put like a lot more effort into making one-on-ones, but before I was able to sell my one-on-one works, it was very casual. I didn't put like too much story, like deep story to it. It was very casual. It was very light. But ever since I was able to make money out of my one-on-ones, I put more effort and storytelling. And because of that, I wasn't able to produce those kind of work more than, the amount I used to make in the past. So I would make maybe like 3 to 5 per year, and it's getting less, unfortunately, and I'm just like putting a lot more like soul into it, I guess. And yes, and then Hands of Times. So that piece I made it in 2024, and that was auctioned in the Christie's.
Okay. And then, so you put a lot more time in this. Could you take us maybe through that process? I think maybe there's a little bit of writing on the front. Like, take us through your sort of process of creating these one-on-ones.
Yeah, because I use a lot of Some are pretty emotional and pretty heavy. I use, like, for example, like life and death, tell one character story, whole life within like 30 seconds. And I try to create a story that is just basically about life in general, like all this hardship, about love, the relationship that you have, and just the relationship between your parents or yourself. So it gets kind of hard and also not easy to come up with something new.
Sure.
Because I already covered, life, love, and just there aren't that many stories that you can really move people.
Sure.
Unless it's because if you look at like movies that you watch and you cry about, it's pretty similar. It's about love, it's about like death, it's about life. This is always a struggle for me as an artist. Like, I try to come up with something deep and meaningful, but I get this creative block where I already covered this, I can't reuse it. So, I mean, there are times that I want to kind of reuse the past stories that I used before and make it like slightly different or just better. But at the same time, I want to make something totally new and something fresh. And so those inspirations doesn't come quite easily, and it comes and goes. And unfortunately, I'm not able to like produce heavy works that many than I would like to.
But that shows that you're very thoughtful. And to your point about the same stories, I mean, we've had this since the beginning of time, and humans communicating, whether it was the hunt and the cave paintings to thinking about altarpieces and cathedrals and telling stories and teaching lessons. Or I just was in Bangkok, outside of Bangkok, and there's so many bodhisattvas. There's like these sculptures and these reliefs of people telling stories about crops and harvesting and love and death and all these different types of themes. So I think it's interesting that you take this sort of lineage of storytelling of these stories that are human, and you add this sort of like contemporary twist, whether it's pop culture. I mean, we're here in Korea now, and there's such a push for the K-pop, and there's just such a vital, thriving, creative, whether it's music, visual, dance, etc. There's such an amazing energy here. Maybe we could talk about, I know pop culture is sort of part of your practice too. Mm-hmm. So if we have these baselines of these historical stories that have been told since the beginning of time, maybe you can talk about how pop culture comes into it, and that sort of maybe leads us into your Deeple project as well, and how that sort of came about.
Yeah, so if you look at my art, it's pretty easy to understand. It's very
accessible,
like approachable. And even my whole goal is to make art that is understandable from all different ages, from young to old. And if you look at the design, the art style is very approachable. But if you look a little more deeper, you can tell that there's a, deep and meaningful, just deeper emotions and story. And the reason I do that is because like, I don't want to make art that is just visually approachable, but I want to make art that makes you move and that makes you think. So for me, my goal is to make art that is, can be appreciated through all different kinds of people, not just people who likes art, but to people who has no idea about anything about art. They can just look at my art and can understand the story right away. And my philosophy about art is for everyone. And what I mean by that is art should be like a universal language that anyone can understand without having a knowledge of anything at all. So I just want art. I use art to tell the stories. When my priority is to tell a good story, the language itself should be easy to understand. Because I'm not trying to like make like a very like abstract or like tricky visual language that is hard to understand. I just want the storytelling to be very straightforward. And if I can like just stop someone from the street and tell them to look at my art, that person should be able to understand the story right away. And that's like kind of my thing.
Yeah, I love that. I think sometimes the best stories are the simple stories. And I think we talked a little bit before where I've been with you here in Seoul is about poetry and about keeping things very simple and distilling them down. So things that are relatable, I think art, this thing where it's not complex is really important. So we go into the Deeple, and maybe you could talk about that project and explain it too.
Yeah, so, Deeple is just everyday characters that is related to the art that I just create. I can use those characters to one of my stories, and it's just my visual language.
And Deeple was DeeKay people.
Right.
Yeah.
So Deeple, the name is the combination of my name, DeeKay, and the people. So I just combined that. So it's Deeple.
Love it. Love it.
It's very simple. And I thought, it sounds cute.
Cute.
So it just stuck to me. And Deeple is about it's kind of like PFP, but slightly different because, PFP is all about, you get this random car or whatever, and then after reveal it shows the different reality and like traits and stuff, right? But Deeple, you can just customize it however you want, and you just mint whatever you see. So there's no rarity, and it's just like you're creating your own version of like your own avatar, and people, then that's the fun part of it.
So there's this fun aspect, and for those that are just learning about Deeple, it feels like you're basically an avatar. You find the base, and then you're able to customize it.
Yes.
So you could think of it as like a digital Build-A-Bear or some other type of customizable type of piece that you can own then.
Exactly. It's that's exactly it, like digital Build-A-Bear. Yeah.
Amazing. I think it also is a little bit more complex too, because these have emotions as well, and they're very human emotions. So it's very interesting to see you create characters and them be complex in a very simple way. I guess that leads us into your piece, because these DeeKay people are in the piece that you debuted at Art Basel Hong Kong, had an amazing booth with AOTM Gallery, and you were able to showcase some works that you've been working on, but then also you had an amazing projection on a building with the Hong Kong Tourist Board. Could you share a little bit about that piece that was projected?
Yes, the Hong Kong Tourism Board piece was pretty last minute thing. They asked me to create a piece that could represent like Hong Kong. And when I think about Hong Kong, I think about busy, energetic, like all these people, living their lives. And it kind of reminded me, I found a connection with Hong Kong people with my Deeples. And I just wanted to express the busy life and energetic into one piece. So I just had all this Deeple characters walking from left to right and right to left. And it's just showing that, everyone's just living their lives. They all look different, but then we somehow just coexist all together in this one place. And that just shows the color of what Hong Kong is. And it could also be, any other different cities too, like New York City or like Los Angeles. And yeah.
Well, and Hong Kong is very unique because you have the bottom or first floor, and then you have the walk bridge floor. So there's a lot of walking throughout the city. And I think what was so powerful about your piece is that you have all these different walks of life, different people from different experiences, but you also have created a little thought bubble, and it's sort of showing what they're going through. And we think about how many times we encounter people day to day and we don't know what's in their thought bubble. And these thought bubbles range in all different types of things. Maybe tell us about why at this point you decided to have the thought bubble, because this isn't, it's shown up occasionally with the narrative, but this is like very, very there's a lot going on in this piece.
Yeah. As someone who creates art that focuses on emotions, I always imagine about all different types of emotions that people go through. So when I look at you, I can kind of tell like what emotions you go through, or, that's kind of my thing. I just imagine like what kind of state that person is whenever I meet someone. And, looking at people in Hong Kong, like I see someone happy, I see someone kind of tired, I see someone who looks hungry or whatever. So I just imagine all those emotions and thoughts. And all those emotions are what we go through daily lives. We're not always stuck into like one emotion. And I just wanted to put all those different types of emotions and thoughts into one place, and people would be walking, and then you see that thought bubbles that would appear like here and there. And I guess the whole meaning of that piece was that, we're all pretty much the same. We're all humans. We all go through different emotions, but we just happen to be in a one same place, and we make this perfect harmony all together.
Oh, that's really beautiful. So we're making harmony even in our different states of being. So emotions there, and we have the other piece that you presented, which is quite personal, it feels like. Maybe you could tell us about that piece. And this piece actually on Instagram got nearly 1 million likes. Could you tell us about that?
So I had 3 pieces that is related to the whole booth exhibition. It's called Are You Okay? And the other pieces are called I Wanna Run. And I Wanna Run are editions, and Are You Okay is one of one. And that piece was pretty personal because it was my first piece that explored in a darker emotions. Because if you look at my past animations, it's mostly about, uplifting and bright, just colorful. But that piece is dark because at the time I was going through some hardship and I was struggling to, I wasn't motivated. I just felt like hopeless and I was in a dark place. And at the time I still had this creative void, I still wanted to create something. But because, making uplifting art I thought that was my thing, that was my color.
The cute.
Right. So, but I wasn't able to do that even though I wanted to create something. And the reason is because, I'm sad, but I'm not, and forcing myself to create something positive wasn't just working. And it almost felt like, I'm lying to myself. So, that's when I started to, try, maybe I'll do some darker emotions to it. And I was sad, but I was still able to fill my creative void. And that's how the Are You Okay piece came about.
That's so amazing that you were able to then use art as a way to sort of process things that were personal to you. And I think that is the powerful thing about art. And I think the more powerful thing about art is that then you were able to convey that and share that with over, millions of people. I think the views were like nearly 15 million or 12 million.
Yeah, the view, I don't even know about the views. It's like,
but yeah, just even that someone
amount.
actually engaged with it too and they related to it is a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
This is something that I drive home a lot of times, is that you can't even achieve that in a gallery or a museum in that amount of time.
Yeah.
You're not going to even, it's for so many people to be able to experience this is really phenomenal through the social and thinking about distribution. But one thing that's really interesting is that then when you were in Hong Kong, so you had that experience on the smaller social Instagram feed, and that was very personal and that had a lot of likes. But you made an observation, you told me about the experience of people basically in Hong Kong experiencing the other piece at a larger scale. There was sort of much more engagement. Can you talk a little bit about scale and how you saw that in Hong Kong with the 2 different pieces?
Yeah, so as a digital artist, right, I create a piece and the most exciting part is uploading it on Instagram and showing it to the people and just observe like how much of engagements I get. And that's like the most exciting part for me. And for our Are You Okay piece, did like crazy engagements and, probably like the best engagements that I had just, compared to like everything. But the people, it's also called Invisible Story actually. Invisible Stories, that piece didn't perform well in terms of like engagements compared to like our Are You Okay piece. So, because, as a digital artist, social media is like the main stage for us. And we observe that, okay, this piece worked well and this piece didn't. So it's like a way for myself to know like which artwork is better and which artwork is not. And because, Are You Okay piece did like super well, I was pretty confident that it's going to do fine on the in real life exhibition. But for the Invisible Stories, that piece was just okay. It still had good engagements. But
this was on Instagram. It had decent engagement, but was not as good as Are You Okay?
Right. There's like a huge gap. So I wasn't sure if this piece was going to be okay in real life because, it's also going to be shown at the Hong Kong Tourism Board, and it's also at the booth, at that kind of level opportunity, I have to show my best work ever, right?
So you put it out there, and were you surprised?
Yes, I was very surprised. At first I was very anxious because of the social observations, I wasn't confident. But once I had it up there, and just observing how people were reacting to it. And I became, confident slowly. And it was quite interesting because, of course, the Are You Okay piece is very heavy and it's very emotional. But the Invisible Stories it's also emotional, but at the same time, it has like a little fun part to it too. So people were more engaging with that piece, and I found that very interesting because I had no idea that it's gonna do well in real life experience, and it turns out that Invisible Stories was more popular than our Yoke piece in real life.
Yeah, it's interesting because the in real life public piece, the cute is sort of that hook. It brings them in, and then there's a deeper message, not darker necessarily. But then Are You Okay is a much more personal, like it has another type of message, but and intimate, and to see it smaller on a screen. And that's where we go about what we were talking about earlier, is like it's really interesting for an artist that's creating digitally to also think about what is the output, what is the size of the screen, is it a projection, is it a print, all these different types of things. So you're not just creating an image, you're also creating an experience.
Yeah.
So in terms of experience, you've had these amazing life experiences. You had that show in Korea. You've done this stuff in Hong Kong. You have the Deeple. What do you see 5 to 10 years for maybe the Deeple project, these 101s? What's the DeeKay Deeple sort of world look like to you?
As an artist, I'm always gonna be focusing on creating meaningful one-on-one pieces. I think that's always going to be my number one thing. But that doesn't mean that, I'm also going to be focusing on like smaller collections as well. Just so like editions and like the Deeples. And like I said, like I want to create art that connects everyone and that is easy to understand for everyone. So I would say the Deeple is something that can be accessible to the people who are not into art, something more collectibles and something more that is quite approachable, And for the one-on-one pieces, I also want to make art that is accessible to, appreciated by those who are really into art. So like fine art, like traditional art. And I want to so basically I just want to exist in both worlds, like into the art world and also this mainstream world who are not really into art.
But they don't know it yet. And I think you're being successful at both. I think we were in Hong Kong, and Alan Lau, the art collector and also patron of M+, talked about art is merch and merch is art.
Yeah.
So there are these new ways to think about what is art and how we are able to reach different audiences. Before we go to the last question, I'm going to do a quick round robin with you. Okay. I'm going to give you 2 options. You're going to answer one or the other. Quiznos or Subway?
Quiznos.
Fire, water, or grass?
Grass.
Main character or background?
Background.
Custom or default?
Custom.
BTS or Blackpink?
BTS.
Cute or a little sad?
Cute.
Loop or progression?
Loop.
Mario, Luigi, or maybe Kirby?
Mario.
A small moment or a big story?
A small moment.
2D or 3D?
2D.
Hold on or let go?
Let go.
Play the game or rewrite it?
Play the game.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. As we leave people today, when they enter into your world, whether it's through an animation, sculpture, or a character, are they entering a world you created, or are they sort of discovering a new version of themselves?
I would say both, actually. This is still my world. I still have this distinguishable art, the visual language that I created, which is my world. But I don't want everything to be about myself. I want people to discover themselves as well through my art. So I guess I want my art to be kind of like a bridge where, they're able to discover their own version of themselves, or find like deeper meanings or emotions or stories that they could find.
Well, DeeKay, I think you're very successful creating these bridges. Thank you for sharing your artwork. Thank you for sharing Soul with me this week. And thank you for sharing this time.
Thanks for having me. This was quite fun.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.